So the general pieces of advice I want to give that I hopefully are more specific to career and not just like for a regular proposal is first is like building a cohesive research history. So I spend a lot of time thinking about like what is my PhD work and where I want to go with that and sort of make them connected, but not going off in a completely different direction, but also not just like doing the same old thing that I had been doing before. And that was both helpful for the writing of the proposal and also for helping me like define myself as a researcher for the next few years. So it was helpful for my own professional development too. Second is a topic that often comes up is how to combine research and education, which seems to be important in these proposals. So what I did in my proposal, which I just offering as an example, is I decided to use the research prototype to teach students in my VR class. So that has the benefit of both hopefully helping the students and also giving me a chance to get some informal feedback from users. And the last thing I want to mention is broadening participation in computing. So it's a really important part of the career proposal. Definitely spend more time than a regular proposal. I participated in a bunch of activities beforehand, like some STEM workshops for high school girls and things like that. Took my prototypes on the road, had people crash test them, and it was a lot of fun. And I kind of learned like what's easily understandable for people in high school or people who are maybe freshmen or sophomores. I also took a lot of pictures. I think that was nice to include in the proposal. So that's it for me. I think that's my 3 minutes. I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And let's move on now to Joseph Jornet from Northeastern in ECE.
Okay, thank you. And thank you again for the opportunity to share, some thoughts with people who hopefully will be even more successful. So my experience, well, not that different. I started as assistant professor 2013. I waited 3 years to send my first attempt at the career proposal and it didn't work. So I sent it again after a year and it didn't work. So, well, they said third time the charm. So, well, it worked, right? You will say, okay, what changed in between? Well, my topic was always the same, actually, since the first year, terahertz communication networks. But then what was different? Well, a couple of things were more mature. One, my work, and second, the community. So these are two things to keep in mind. So when you pick your research topic, right, that it was already mentioned, the idea is that your career proposal needs to leverage your work, right? It can be, a new insight or direction within what you know how to do, or it can be, well, something that is totally different, but that you can leverage the tools that you have demonstrated that you know how to use. Of course, if in addition you can leverage some of the unique existing infrastructure that you or your department got through some other programs, well, that only gets better. It's important, of course, that it's something that it's not only interesting to you, right? NSF is trying to do works that are impactful and meaningful. So I assume that that's a given. And one more thing, again, when you're an assistant professor, you try many things, but one thing, continuously jumping topic does not really work, because in every proposal, you need to, again, convince the reviewers that you are the best person to do that work. And to do that, well, preliminary works help. And if you're constantly jumping topics, it's very difficult to get meaningful preliminary works or early results. That's for the topic. How about for the plan? Again, related, right, to what we just heard. A career award is 5 years. Okay, it's 5 years, so long in time. But then it's only 100K a year. And again, 100K a year sounds great, but it's only 100K a year. And, if you are thinking of what's a medium or large effort, we're talking about a few millions. No, this is 500,000, more or less. So with that in mind, do not overpromise. I'm going to do every single thing, because if you say that, then there is really no room for you to convince anyone that you can do everything. And do not be nearsighted. It is 5 years, right? So it's that sweet spot between telling people, okay, this is what I want to do, and I will start with this, and I will continue with that. So you need to have a vision. You need that vision. Then you need to provide steps to realize that vision. You don't need to, again, go with too many steps or go, go crazy with ideas. But again, this will help. The last part, it's integration of research and education, right? So remember, research means that we create knowledge. Education means that we share and disseminate the knowledge. And the question is, okay, with who are we sharing this knowledge, and how do we share it? And of course, being in academia, usually, okay, the first stop is students, whether those are students that we see in class, but also maybe we have activities with high school students or middle school students. And I don't mean that you need to create those programs. I mean that I'm very confident that your institutions already have those programs. So try to pitch in. You will see that, of course, we want to diversify engineering. So how can we engage with underrepresented minorities? I can tell you what I end up doing, which is like, being actively reaching out to minorities. And for example, some of my best students are students that they did not reach out to me, and are students that I engage, and they said, well, we never thought of research because that's not what we're used to deal with. And suddenly they turn out to be excellent. So don't be shy reaching out, and don't be shy if you get a reject. How many rejects do we get per month or per week, right? So we're fine. Other communities that you can engage is industry, and as well as regulation and policy makers, depending on your topics. And it's great that you say you're going to write this many papers, but if you can get patents and protect your intellectual property, or maybe that idea you had eventually is part of a standard, well, that's the type of big thing that can help not only your career be great, but actually your actual life career to be great. And one last thing is that I think it pays off that you get to know your community. By community, I mean the people who will evaluate your work, the people who will help your work grow. So we're dealing with, participate in conferences, workshops, maybe standardization meetings, and of course, also let your community discover you. Help as reviewer, get engaged in TPCs of different conference or different type of organizations. Of course, do not overdo it. Some people say, okay, so I'm going to be in every single TPC of every conference. Look, it's great to do service, but service will not make you famous or give you the right type of fame. Your research will. And as always, if I have said anything that contradicts what your direct mentors and colleagues say, go with them. Talk to your colleagues, talk to your mentors. They know their game. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And now we're going to move on to Swaram Kumar.
All right. Hope you can see my slides. Yeah, great. So hi, everyone. My research is on wireless systems, and my career award was on low power wide area networking, long range IoT networking. I'm going to tell you a little bit of my story first. It was after 3 career proposal submissions. Was my third attempt. The third time's the charm, just like the previous speaker, just like Joseph. I also benefited actively from the feedback. One fun fact: it was 3 career proposals and 2 kids later that I got my career eventually accepted. For me, the biggest lesson was, of course, there were two lessons. One is the feedback that you actually get from the reviews that really helped me refine future submissions. But actually, I found that my biggest error was not stated in the text of the proposal. In the text of the reviews that I got. I think the biggest lesson that I learned was it's very important to balance both short-term and long-term problems. That is, thinking about whether your proposal is actually a 5-year agenda. The other thing that I realized is my own work can be my enemy. So obviously, you're going to submit your career proposal on the idea that you're most excited about. So when I submitted my first proposal in 2017, it was rated high competitive. Everyone was happy about it, but it was, there was a little bit missing. And then I was so excited about all that work, and then I started writing papers about it and submitting papers. And then now later, I can't propose the same thing. So your own work can be your enemy, especially if you keep trying to resubmit. So you need to take a step back and think, okay, as years advance, your 5-year agenda suddenly becomes a 4-year or 3-year agenda. So you need to think ahead even more what's left in the space. And that was one of the biggest lessons that I learned. So I sort of broke down my advice into 3 sort of chunks. I'm sure there's going to be some overlap with what you've heard from the other speakers. First, something you could do today, if reach out to your NSF program manager and try and serve on NSF panels if you can, because that was best feedback that I've ever got, because I could actually see how the sausage is made, see how the decisions are done, avoid some of the common mistakes by just serving on these panels, understanding how they're evaluated. I don't think you can serve on career panels, but you can serve on maybe perhaps other panels where you've not submitted proposals. And program managers are always looking for reviewers. When you're right before you're starting to work on the career proposal, I would recommend starting as early as you can. This should really be your best idea. And think about what you actually want to be known for as a researcher. What is going to be your long-term research agenda for the next 5 years? Think about your best idea again. And really, my biggest advice would be balance short-term and long-term problems. One way I've seen that done is have multiple thrusts where the first few thrusts are, less risky, you know how to do it, and some of the final thrusts are really long-term, open-ended problems. Because if everything is really very well fleshed out, panelists have this feeling that, oh, this might already be done. Now, after you have your first draft, a few other things I would suggest, and this was already suggested by others: get feedback from colleagues, have people read it, including people outside your area in the broader community, not necessarily working on working very broadly in other area of network systems, for example. Also, this might be a good time to think about how to integrate research and education, how to integrate your research and outreach. There might be lots of opportunities within your institution, but usually the most boring thing I find in proposals is, we're going to implement this in a course. We're going to do this. There's this existing K-12 program, and we're going to do this, or we've done this in the past. But if you can have a unique spin, something creative that you're doing, something you've thought out of the box that actually gels well with your research agenda, that has a bit of extra value. So try and spend a little bit of extra effort on broader impacts and broadening participation in computing. Those are two different things, but it's good to think more deeply about those as well. That's it from my end. Oh, I think you're
Sorry, thank you so much. And with that, we're going to move on to Professor Min-Lan Yu from Harvard University.
Yes, hi, I'm Min-Lan Yu. Sorry that I didn't prepare slides. I just can't talk for a few minutes. I got my career in 2015. And after that, I also serve on some career panels. So I get to see both sides, the submission side and review side. So I can first talk about my submission experience. When I first start my faculty job, the biggest challenge for me was to I need to write a career proposal that's lasts for 5 years. What's a big idea I have? I'm consulting to senior professor, how to think of a brand new kind of direction in my research. And the best feedback I get is start small. Don't worry about what the big agenda is, but focus on the immediate next thing you want to do. So I spent the first year in my faculty life career trying to look for the next stuff I need to do. So it turns out that I did 2 works. One is on diagnosis TCP. Another is on measurement on switches. And then I think when I need to write career, the way I would just look at the work I've done and seeing how to build a framework that covers my previous work, but add one more dimension to these works. So it's not just the third piece of work, but really a big dimension that could cover the work, but much broader. So that's why I was thinking about programmable measurement framework that try to have a good way for people to specify the measurement, but then compile down to measurement on both TCP and switches, and then also extend to NICs, different applications. So once you put up the framework, there are a lot more dimensions you could make the career work cover a wide range of work to last for 5 years. The second kind of challenge for me is it's easy to say to start early, but we're all busy with teaching, writing papers. So it's really late, in the summertime when I actually have time to write about career. But one thing I think I did well is even before I write anything, I already start talking to people and get their feedback on this framework I was thinking about. So at conferences, I try to pitch my career proposal as an elevator pitch and get people's feedback. And I talked to a lot of people, and it turns out to be very useful to me. There are people who point me to related works, point me to one small piece of actual work I could do, or give me feedback on if the framework is well thought of, what if what's the difference with the other frameworks you're thinking about? So even before I write career, I already get lots of feedback for the writing. So when I actually sit down in the summer to do the work, do the writing work, I already know like what the potential reviewers may have in their mind when they read my ideas. Now I can also share a little bit experience on when I read other people's career proposals, what I find is common things. One is, I think sometimes I see proposals that have a large portion of the writing as their past work. So that's typically sometimes hard for people to know, like what's the new work you want to do. I think it's also mentioned in a few of the earlier talks. So it's important to make sure in the writing, the space you spend on your finished work need to be limited, like say just a couple pages. And the second, I think it's also a really dynamic, not only for career, but also for other proposals. It's like reviewers typically have the feedback of, like either your idea are too vague, so we're not sure if you can make it work, or it's like too concrete. So have you already done it, or it's too narrow? So I think it's very hard to balance these two parts. And I like Swearen's idea, like typically you have to have a few ideas that's really well thought of, like immediate steps you need to do, and also a few ideas that's really long-term that can serve as a long-term research, and that part can be a bit vague. And overall, I think another tip I got from people is a way to view proposals, like a few honest paper together. If you like can think of like the cool ideas and put them together into a framework, then it will be really nice as a career proposal. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. And last but not least, we Maria Zhaleva.
Okay, hi everyone. Hopefully you can see my slides and you can hear me. Right, so my career was on the broad topic of automated spectrum measurement of radio spectrum. And it was awarded in 2019 after 2 attempts. So my tips, and I've sort of organized them around the 3 main components of a career, which are the research, the education component, and then the broader impacts of your work. So when you think about the research, you know, one thing that is different between the career and other proposals is that with the career, you have to think, you know, how to design a research agenda that will enable a lifetime of contributions to science, or, you know, that would create some foundation that you'll be able to use even after your career project is over. So once you have an idea about the, and this is where you know, what previous presenters have mentioned becomes very important. You know, how do you balance sort of the short-term goals, the long-term goals of the project, but also how do you open up those you know, long-term goals to, you know, past the scope of this proposal. Another component that I think speaks really well to, or shows that you have thought about your proposal, is to really discuss how you're going to evaluate what you're proposing. So what is your plan to evaluate whether you've been successful with the work that you have proposed? And then you also need to demonstrate that you're the right person to undertake this work. And this can happen, you know, through discussing what papers and expertise you have gained so far in the topic that you will be researching, but also by demonstrating preliminary results, especially to motivate those shorter term goals that you're putting forth. In terms of education, you know, I think one way that helped me to stray away from generic, you know, propositions such as I'll just develop a class, is to think about what expertise is lacking right now in the general research area that I'll be proposing, and then see what is necessary to bridge up that gap. So if I imagine the perfect graduate student walking through my you know, office door and starting right away on research, what would be the qualifications that the student will have? And you know, the research that I was proposing was inherently quite interdisciplinary, and there wasn't really a course that meets that need. So that was one direction to focus on. And then just in terms of creating creating diversity in the field, that's an important piece to emphasize, especially in the education and broadening participation plans. Try not to do this as a patchwork, as again, we'll do something, but try to weave it in your narrative and motivated by thinking, what have you done? Maybe you've had undergrads, maybe you've participated in some workshops or done demos that are specifically targeted towards underrepresented groups. And so weave these stories to demonstrate that you really care and will be able to do to improve diversity in the field. And so in terms of broader impacts, this was already mentioned, so I won't spend much time, but think beyond your immediate research outcomes, whether they'll be able to impact policy or the industry or some standardization efforts. And if you have the ability to pitch to someone and then ask them, would you give me a letter that this would be useful? That's nice to demonstrate, that when you talk about the potential impacts of your work, you can point to a letter that somebody used to say that your work would really be useful. So in terms of a timeline of my timeline that I traveled, so before I got my career, I actually had the CRII, so the Research Initiation Grant, and so that was related to the topic that I was proposing in my career. So if anybody is in a similar situation, I'm happy to answer questions around this. In the previous talks, you heard about the importance of reaching out to your community and getting feedback. For me, that also included NSF program managers. So to the extent to which I could understand which program is going to be likely reviewing my proposal, I tried to reach out to managers and pitch my idea to them to see if it's fundable and sort of what I should specifically target. So with some feedback from the community and program managers, I sat down to write my first attempt and that got declined. And then on the second attempt, I tried to gather inputs again from the program managers about how the panel went, because that doesn't necessarily always come across from the reviews. And this helped me again steer sort of what were the deficiencies. So, in my first attempt, the scope was too ambitious, which really boiled down to me not defining something, and there was a mismatch of what I thought I was saying and what the reviewers read. As much as I tried to emphasize the novelty over my CRII, that was not clear. So things like this really killed it the first time. And so with that input, I gathered some more feedback, did some more writing, and the project was happily awarded in 2019. So I'll stop here in interest of time, and hopefully you'll have some questions.
Okay, thank you. We have some questions in the chat already, but we're going to wait till the Q&A after both panels are done. And I really appreciate the questions. So now I'm going to share my screen real quick and say, now we're moving on to, we have some really fabulous researchers in the NETS area who have agreed to talk to us about things that they look for when they're reviewing these proposals. These are people who've been around long enough to know, what to look for. So without further ado, I'm going to pass it over to Dennis Geckel from UMass Amherst.
Thank you, Katie. Let me try and share my one simple slide. One second. Okay, so yeah, so I've been here for 25 years, probably been reviewing panel proposals for 24 of them. So done a long time. So somebody asking the questions that Katie sent around, sometimes about, what's too broad and what's too narrow. And my experience on panels and my own preference is that they're not super prescriptive, right? Sometimes we'll have somebody who comes in, and I think Giassi, when I heard talking about VR, was kind of that person that she was super excited about VR, right? This application area, and she's going to do all these things to kind of make it happen. I don't know, I just from that short talk, right? So sometimes we get these proposals from people that say, here's this cool application area, and I'm going to integrate other stuff that maybe they're well-known techniques, but in some really clever way, and that's really good. Other times, we get the exact opposite, which is something that's really narrow and really deep. And these are the kind of proposals, I guess I like all these, both types of proposals, but these ones where you kind of say everybody else is doing it wrong. And look, I have preliminary work that shows that I have a better idea. And then here's these extensions to various timeframes for the continuing work. So like I said, so we're not really split, I think, on a type of proposal. The second point, which I've already heard from some of the more recent awardees, is that you want to be clear, right? I think that the best advice I got from a mentor when I was young, you're not going to fool an NSF panel, right? So be clear about what you're doing. When I thought for this panel, and Katie asked me to do this, I thought, what are the worst proposals I see? They're ones that just kind of wander away and think we're going to stop reading or something like that. And so I really, be really clear. Having said that, speculative is okay. What I do is I label my speculative stuff. What I'll have is short-term stuff, and then I'll actually say, and here are some more speculative things. They're credible, but not really well thought out, and they're high risk, high reward. And don't be afraid to label them like that so you don't get killed by the reviewers saying, oh, this stuff is too speculative. They won't say it if you said it, right? So you can say speculative, right? Avoid tricks, right? So many proposals we see, people are, they think we're gonna be impressed if they say Nash equilibria 15 times or something like that, right? Or they know we're gonna attack their integration between their topics. So they draw a diagram with their 4 topic areas and they put arrows. It's a fully connected graph, right? But it doesn't match the research. We see right through that, right? So don't do that, right? It's not gonna work, right? So those diagrams are great when they're credible, right? So they're credible. In education, I've seen it from the people who've been recent awardees, all of you, you were excited. That comes across. When I read an educational section, I can tell, and I will forgive you a lot of other things if I can tell you're excited, okay? Don't give me, people said, yes, use the programs at your university. That memo's out. Everybody knows that. And so we see boilerplate from the DEI staff member all the time now, right? I know what that looks like because my person provides that also, right? Integrate it with your research program. It's really easy to do. Make sure you do that. The third thing, which a lot of people don't do, is provide references. So I see proposals where somebody will make a really strong statement, like I can remember one specifically where somebody made a very strong statement and said, study after study shows blah, but there was not a single reference. And I knew that most studies in that area were completely flawed, but I couldn't go look at them, right? And so make sure you provide references. If you're serious about it, provide references. And then finally, something that the recent awardee said that I can't emphasize enough. If you've been there 3 or 4 years, please start a track record. You want to show me you're excited about doing this stuff? Have done some of it, right? And as you talk about what you're going to do, say, I will grow what I've already done, this really cool thing, into a bigger program. And that goes a long way with me. That one thing shows excitement. That's all I have, Katie.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Dennis. And now we're going to move on to Brent Ladd, who's from Purdue, and he's the Director of Education at a Center for Science and Innovation. So, Brent.
Thanks, Katie.
All right.
Just got to take a minute here to share my screen. And so Katie had asked me to say a few words about, more specifically, broadening participation in computing. And so the last 10 years, I've had the great fortune of serving as the Education and Diversity Director for a large national level science and technology center. And so what I'll do is just, this first slide is just kind of showing a couple of examples of what we were able to accomplish over the last 10 years. Although I would qualify it with, we got a slow start, and although I thought I understood diversity in the beginning, I learned a lot this first couple of years. So although I think the career is quite different from a large center, I think there's a few things I've learned that hopefully I can mention here that might help you all. So one of the things I think that really made a big difference and just understanding what is broadening participation really all about is to have a philosophy that helps to drive the actions. And for us, we understood, both as individuals and the community we were trying to create, to have a really expansive view of what that is. And in the first couple of years, the thing that we were missing and we eventually understood that we needed is total integration. And I don't have a lot of time to unpack this, but you've probably all come across, this idea of diversity as well as inclusion, and they're not the same thing. And so once we really understood that we need to fully integrate inclusive diversity into everything we were doing programmatically in education, as well as research, that's when our actions really started to have results. And, then we continued to improve year to year. So we had a lot of different things going on, but one of the things that I'll mention here and kind of unpack a little bit more is that we got our staff and most of the PIs to really commit to going into more of this professional development of implicit or unconscious bias training, which probably many of you have heard of. It's kind of in the last year or so, I think a lot of us are more aware of the importance of doing that kind of work. And then for me personally, just taking that deeper dive and then actively becoming an ally for inclusive diversity and having that at the forefront of my mind has made a really big difference. So, some of these might not be your typical things, but my advice, and I've helped some faculty over the last several years with their career grants. And one of the things in talking with NSF that they do look, I think, positive on is you can integrate your own professional development into your career proposal, and thinking of this long term, that you're not going to get all this overnight, but it's going to take time. But taking a commitment to your own training and professional development, looking at your own implicit biases that might drive how you make decisions, who comes into your lab or who doesn't. I'd recommend checking out Harvard's implicit bias project that they've got there. It's really a consortium of a lot of scholars looking at that phenomenon. And there's a lot of books out there now. You can take a deep dive into those as well. One that's often becoming recommended, and I read it when it came out in 2019, is Kindy's book. So these are just some ideas to kind of jumpstart your own kind of approach to broadening participation. And then the second thing is really to think about really a transparent, tangible pathways, at least one or more that you can develop that is going to lead to broader participation in what you're doing as a researcher. And the thing that I've noticed in working with other faculty is my advice is to make sure it's something you really want to do. I see a lot of faculty kind of throw their hands up, and to the last minute, they throw in something about, I'm going to visit a middle school and do some kind of presentation or something. And I always ask, are you excited about that? To kind of go off of what Dennis was saying. And a lot of them say no. And so it never happens. So if you're going to put something in your proposal, make sure you're excited about doing it. One of the things that made a big difference for us as a center is that we had most of our PIs are excited about their research. And so we found ways of helping them build pathways where at all times they have in their lab at least a minimum of one spot for someone representing an underserved population. And for young faculty, sometimes they don't have funding for that many grad students. So, we help them figure out, how do you get an undergrad started, and mentoring that undergrad, grooming them to become excited about graduate school. And that's how things start to change with broadening participation. And then kind of don't fight this. I don't think the BPC aspects of most of these grants are going away anytime soon. So just embrace the journey. You've got 5 years to think about this career approach, but then put something in there about a vision statement for where you would like to see your lab. What does your lab look like when you're a senior researcher in 20 or 30 years? And I put it as an example there. If you know who Bob Gray is, some do, probably some of you don't, emeritus at Stanford. And, he's kind of almost like a poster child or poster researcher. He's a highly decorated scholar in the computing fields, and someone who is really a great example of what you can do with broadening participation if you commit to it. And he'll even tell you that it really impacted in a very positive way how he starts to ask questions, approaches his research by allowing people who do not look like him or think like him to collaborate with them as students and mentor them. So with that, if you'd like to look under the hood a little more, I've put a link there, soihub.org legacy. You can we've boiled some of this down into lessons learned and resources if you'd like to check those out. And if you want to get in touch with me, feel free to do that. And the best way is my email there. So with that, I thank Katie for inviting me today, and I wish you all the best of luck in your career proposal journey.
Thank you so much. And now we're going to turn it over to Ness Schroff from The Ohio State University. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Katie. I'm just trying to share my screen here. Okay. All right, perfect. So this is going to be a top 5 list of do's and don'ts regarding proposal writing and specifically NSF career proposal. So in terms of the top 5 do's, I would say that every proposal must have a very clear why, what, and how, right? So you want to make it very clear why your problem is important. What are the key challenges that you aim to solve? And more importantly, what will happen if those challenges are not solved? And then how you plan to solve them, right? This means that the proposal must have a very, very strong introduction. So, oftentimes people say the introduction is a make or break. Well, I don't know if it is a make, but it certainly is a break, right? So if you don't have a very compelling story in the introduction, it's unlikely that the proposal will get funded, right? One of the things that I encourage my junior colleagues to do is to provide an example that's very compelling, especially if it's saying something which is non-intuitive that reviewers will remember, right? And that they will come, and then you can keep coming back to it, right? One of the things to recognize is that reviewers are very, very busy, right? And they're going to spend, an hour, max 2 hours on your proposal, given that they have so many proposals to review. So help the reviewers really write the review for you, which means that if there are important elements, don't keep them hiding, right? Don't make the reviewers fish for them. Repeat them for emphasis and help them connect the dots. This is something which has already been discussed, so I'll just be very brief here, which is that the research plan for an NSF career should be commensurate with a 5-year scope. So here I especially recommend that you have substantial preliminary works to build on, which could be based on your PhD, postdoc, or early assistant professor work, and that you have some clear next steps where the panelists will believe you that, okay, these are problems that are, I understand based on the preliminary works that they can be solved, and then some long-term, open, high-risk, high-reward type of questions, that sort of, makes your proposal compelling. And finally, in terms of the do's, learn from successful examples, right? So don't be afraid to ask your friends, ask senior faculty members in your department, your mentors, or even across departments to share, examples of proposals that have been successful. Now for the top 5 don'ts. I think this is something which has already been talked about, so I'll be very brief, which is don't shortchange the broader impact and education plan, right? It should not be an afterthought. It should be something that's clearly integrated in it. Don't propose, too many things, thinking that, okay, if I propose all of these, different things, it'll, something will connect with some reviewer, and therefore, I will be rewarded in some way. In fact, I would say that a very common negative review, and if the NSF program managers were here, they could confirm whether this is the most common negative review, is that the proposal did not provide enough details, right? So make sure that you flesh out the individual thrusts in some detail. And no matter how good your individual problems are, don't write them in terms of disconnected silos, right? So make sure that there is a common thread throughout the proposal, that it's very clear that you're not solving, problem A, problem B, problem C, which are disconnected. And as Dennis said, you put some little figure and show some arrows and kind of connect them up and do these kinds of tricks to sort of show connectivity. That's not the way to do it. Make sure that there is a common thread throughout the proposal. Avoid sloppiness. I mean, which goes back to the point that I think someone made, which is that start early so that you can catch things, have a version of the proposal that's ready almost 2 weeks before it's due, so that you can make sure that you've gone over it, you've written simply, you've avoided flowery language, you've avoided long convoluted sentences, learn about good writing from a variety of sources, which I can sort of provide in my next slide. And for God's sake, don't insult the panelists, right? Which is that, make the case as to why your work is important and why your work is better, perhaps, than the state of the art, but be factual, right? So if, for example, your work through these simulations shows that, in this setting, it is 3 times better than the state of the art, that's perfectly fine, but avoid judgments, avoid imprecise language in comparisons. And here are some resources of interest that I've accumulated on my website, and I'll be happy to share this slide deck with Katie, and we can go from there.
Great.
Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Ness. And now we move on to George Varghese, who's a computer scientist from UCLA.
And share my screen. All right. Okay, so let me see. Okay, so I think almost everybody has said everything that I was going to say, but nevertheless, my burden here is more for people coming from small schools. I notice a lot of people who are from very big schools with great support systems, and I'm just really concerned about the aspiring grant writer from a very who's really done great work, but is now in a maybe small teaching school and doesn't have the support that the other people have, right? So remember, I'm really talking to you, but I hope some of this is biases, and I'll try to explain this picture towards the as we go along. So it does seem really hard to get grants today, right? And and this is probably true for getting papers into great conferences. And people say your grant is not imaginative enough. And certainly the older folks are more, people like us are more bothered about, this is so boring. So, and on the other hand, you have, the other extreme, which is it's not enough data to convince us your idea will work. And, the younger folks will probably stand up for that. And then they'll say your research is too broad. And on the other hand, they'll say your research is too narrow. So you're like, you can't win, and people bounce back between these reviews. And you might think, well, you need a grant to do all these things. And that's exactly the needle you have to thread, which makes it hard, right? It was much easier, I think, when we started. All right, so some suggestions. So I think, especially if you're in a smaller school, I think pick an imaginative idea that will wow the panel. And you know what? It's one way to do something imaginative is just mix 2 areas, right? So, for example, I know Omid, who's on this call, and probably enough, people do a lot of stuff. And again, this is not my area, so I'm just mixing 2 random things, right? So, and even this is kind of boring. So imagine you're working in a school and a small school, and there are some, there's a farming department or something like that, and you've seen some work that people do using to sense the environment, and you figure out a way to, like you think, oh yeah, let's just try and use a phone or something cheap to do this. And this is kind of, even this is boring, but imagine you use a Nintendo game controller or something just comes slightly out of the box, right? And you do this, and then you find some secret weapons near your university, right? Some collaborators. So for example, there might be a colleague in agriculture or a colleague in sociology, and you guys work together. And this is possible, I think, wherever you're at, right? There's somebody who is there in your environment with, maybe there is a particular Monsanto is around or something, and you work with them, and it's something that can only be done where you are, right? And if you can do that, then your panel will probably realize that, wow, you're mixing those two together. And then, even if you're in a teaching school, leverage gifted undergraduates and class projects, right, to build a prototype. Okay, and now you're almost done. You're ready to submit the paper. And this is the dirty secret that a lot of people would say, and it's very cynical, but let me say it anyway, right? When you're nearly done, right? When you're about to write the paper, then submit the proposal and use it to fund the next idea, right? I know it's not supposed to say this, right? And NSF people will probably get very mad at me saying this, but really this is roughly true. And I think, most of us have done this, at times, right? So, okay, let me quickly tell you my story on diversity and broadening participation, which maybe just one little thing that might help. So we did an NSF large grant, and we actually were trying to go for an NSF center. It was even bigger scale, and it failed. We lost to Berkeley in the final round. But we did propose a very imaginative BPC idea, right? The grant was on network design automation. So we were trying to build tools to operate networks. And the BPC idea was training operators around the world, right? People in Kenya and people in India. And it was, wow, it was really cool, right? The only trouble is, by the time we got the money, we found it was really hard to do, right? So our NSF PI, Darlene Fisher, really gave me a hard time, right? She was like, come on, this is a lot of money, right? And you proposed this. And so we were really figuring out how to redo this. And Ramesh Govindan, a co-PI, pointed out something that was very important. I didn't realize, is I always thought that you had to weave it into your research, the BPC. But he said, no, you can do BPC that is separate. And maybe this is, I'm sure none of you had this misconception. So my son, when he was trying to get into college, the college sweepstakes, so he was trying to do something imaginative. And so he decided to build a mentoring program at the website that some of the gifted students at his high school would do things for, would mentor middle schoolers. And so all we did was sort of shift it up and decided to do undergraduates mentor high schoolers. So UCLA undergraduates, and my UCLA undergraduates seemed excited about it. They seem to be, excited. The first things are happening, and suddenly it's beginning to be less talk and more work, and I'm excited about it, right? So I'm thinking that this, in the future, in 20 years, maybe it could scale to the country, or where kids can mentor kids, and they know what's going on. So again, it's one good idea is better than a kitchen sink of small ideas. We also had a bunch of small ideas, and now we think we'll just discard them. And that's all I have.
Thank you so much. And now we move on to Ellen Zagora, who's a computer scientist from Georgia Tech.
Hi, everybody. I'm happy to be here. I did not prepare slides because I've had a last name at the end of the alphabet for my entire life. I was a W, and then I got married and I went to a Z. So I knew that there was no way I could write down anything that would not previously have been said. So this is as dynamic as possible. And I spent the whole time brainstorming what had not been said. So what I'm going to tell you, I think, is extremely pragmatic, because actually the advice has been fantastic. And I think it's also had the property that very little of it has contradicted each other. And that's sometimes rare. You may have already had that experience that, there are many opinions about how to do things, and most of them are right, at least some of the time. So here's my advice, and there are echoes of it in things other people said, but let me be very specific. Okay, so number one, the project summary, right? The project summary is the one-page thing that everybody who reads the proposal reads first. And so there's a little bit to the comments about the introduction potentially being a breaker. I always read the project summary first, right? And and what I would like to get out of that is a pretty good idea of what's going to be in the proposal. And I often, even if I try not to, form an opinion of what I think of the proposal. And then I read the proposal to see if it backs up the opinion that I've formed by reading the project summary. So I would suggest that you spend time on the project summary and on making sure that it has content and that it conveys what's excellent about your proposal. Second suggestion is to have a picture, and to Dennis's point, a picture that visually depicts the relationship between all the different pieces of your proposal, and in a meaningful way, not in every box has words and they're fully connected. And I actually think if you make yourself do this, it will clarify your thinking. It's not actually trivial to make these pictures that are meaningful and that show how the parts fit together. So I suspect when you try to do it, you will learn something about what you are proposing. So have a picture. Third thing, have a detailed plan. So one of the things that sets proposals apart to me is how much thought appears to have gone into kind of laying out the way the work will take place. Now, there's a tension there because, you know, curiosity, when you're doing work that has curiosity to it, you may go off in different directions. But I think it's a way to give panelists a sense that you know, that you know what you're doing, not in a technical way, but in a how to plan work kind of way, how to think about which students might do what parts, where are there places where undergrads would come in, would do pieces, and how do you sequence the work that you're doing. So I didn't used to ever put this in my proposals, but reviewers really seem to like it as a way of conveying that you kind of know what you're doing on a research agenda execution front. I think maybe the last one is don't be subtle. I think Ness, this echoes Ness. Like the reviewers are busy, and you will never. You know, you're never gonna hit them over the head too hard. Okay. I mean, unless you write something super obnoxious, like I'm the only one who can possibly do this work. But in terms of the kind of the big takeaways, you really can't hit them on the head too hard. And I think that in addition to repetition, it also includes things like signposts in the proposal. Like, don't be afraid to use bold in a smart way. Don't be afraid to use italics in a smart way. I mean, don't use 1,500 fonts, but draw the reviewer's eye to the parts that are important. And that's a style, you know, that's a style comment. Yeah, don't be subtle. It's so frustrating. I mean, this happens in papers too, but it happens maybe more in proposals. When you get a review back and it's clear the reviewer didn't understand something that you thought was so clear, you know, and you're like, well, hell, you should have funded my proposal because I was so clear about this, and how could you have missed it, right? And so you really want to get feedback to help you find those places, but also realize that, you know, it's just not that much time that people will spend reading a proposal. They just can't. They're not bad people. They're just super busy people. So make sure to hit them over the head.
All right. Thank you. And now we actually have a few minutes because we have 30 minutes for the meet and greet with Alex Sprinson and others from NSF. And if you have to leave, you have to leave. But if you can stay around to ask questions or answer questions, that would be great for at least, you know, 5 minutes or so. So there was one question in the chat, which we might have answered. What is the best way to balance between our old works that reflect our experience and capabilities to implement and deliver proposed work and a novel new work that we plan to implement and deliver? So do you have any last minute thoughts on that as a panel?
Maybe I can take a stab at this. So
Sure.
What I did in my proposal was I had one section that was titled PI qualifications. And that's where I talked about the work that I had published, the service that I had done that relates to you know, what I was proposing. And then to demonstrate that I have thought about the problems and approaches that I was proposing, then in the research description, I had preliminary work that, you know, was really connected with the next steps, with what was missing. You know, it speaks volumes to, you know, poorly conceived preliminary work when you say, I published this, and then you say you're going to propose something, or you propose something, and the two really are not connected. And so that's when the reviewer knows that you haven't really done preliminary work or thought enough. So, yeah.
Okay, more questions. If you have questions, can you put them in the chat?
Katie, if I can just make one additional comment
You
about
bet.
the previous question. I think it's useful to have, you know, some examples or some graphs which show that you've actually done some preliminary work on the problem that you're investigating, even if it's in a very special case. And then you build on that in terms of your future work. I think that's an effective strategy to show that there is some credibility and that you're not just referring to, you know, references. So, you know, if you can specifically say, okay, I have this germ of an idea in this setting, it shows a 50% improvement, or it shows a factor of 2 improvement. But it's in a very limited setting, and these are the various questions that come out from there. I think that would be helpful.
But may I say something?
Of course. Yes.
Yeah, I just think, Ness, I think this was my model, but increasingly I've gone to proposal reviews and people seem to want far more than just some preliminary results. It's almost to the point where they almost want the final result. So I hate to say this, but it just seems like, we are setting up these young people to fail if we say, do, just a little bit of preliminary results, right? Because it's the same young people who are actually knocking out proposals because there's just preliminary results, right? So I'm a bit cynical about how much preliminary and how much more close to final are required.
Yeah, I can also say.
Yeah, I mean, I think you have to be careful though, George, because sometimes when there's too much preliminary work, then you get the reverse criticism, which is that, what is proposed is not novel enough. So
Ellen was going to say
there is definitely a delicate trade-off, and but anyway, I mean, this is my own view, but yeah.
Ellen, you were going to say something?
I was just going to say, I do think that the pendulum has, maybe it's not a pendulum because I'm not sure it's ever going back the other way, but I do think that it's moved in a direction where there's more expectation of completed. Well, there's more expectation that you convince people you know what you're talking about, and that you don't ask them to, for instance, let you scope an interesting space and then trust you to find some things within it. I think there's less willingness to do that, which to be perfectly honest, I think is quite a shame. But we're also being pragmatic here, so we're trying to tell you kind of what's the reality. I would hope that the career is perhaps slightly more a little bit more open, in the sense that it is early days for you in your process, and so of course you don't have a gigantic body of completed work, and it's 5 years, and so there should be some room for some pieces that you're really not quite sure yet what's going to happen with them, because 5 years is a long time. On the other hand, it's instructive how the example, the histories, almost nobody got it the first time, right? That maybe that actually should make you feel better, whether you haven't tried yet or you've tried and not been successful. And so that's undoubtedly a combination both of maturity, meaning more under your belt, improving how well you write a proposal. I don't think it's just that people got better at writing the proposals. I think there's something to this kind of to having some more maturity in your work.
So I have a little bit more to say if we have time. So I think it's really hard to achieve this, but ideally it'd be nice if you have done related work as like points in a graph, and it'd be nice if your future work is not like continuing of the line, it's like additional points. Then you will face a big like struggle of where do I stop? Like what are the past work, what are the future work? But it'd be really nice if you look at add one more dimension, it's like a service. Then you can show people I've done points in this surface that I have knowledge here. But by looking at the surface, there's a lot more to do. Like a surface is certainly more than the points. So this will be really nice structure for the proposal. Like I find my founded proposal always like this, and this is really hard to achieve. I do have a lot of failed proposals that I scratch my head, I cannot come up with the surface. But I think that would be the ideal case.
All right. Well, I want to thank you all so much. I'm going to introduce Dr. Alex Sprinson from NSF Nets. Alex, can you?
Yeah. Can you hear me okay? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. And so what we would like you to do is we need to spotlight you. And there he is. Let's thank everybody. Yay, you all did a great job. So Alex, I'm going to hand it over to you as program director at NETS, Okay. Yeah,
thank you so much. Yeah, first of all, I want to also introduce my colleague, Murat Torlak. If you can spotlight him as well, right? So he will be here. And also Anne von Lehmann, she might be able to join. So today is kind of crazy day, but we try to have multiple program directors to join. And first of all, thank you so much for organizing this. I think it's the first event that NET's virtual organization put together. And it's fantastic. I think we don't have anything to say more than those distinguished panelists said. It's really, really enlightening, and hopefully that it's very useful and we'll get a really nice set of proposal. So, okay, so I will have here Dr. Anne van Lemmen, and maybe Anne, if you want to introduce yourself.
Yeah. Hi, good morning or afternoon to everybody, and welcome to this workshop. I guess it's well underway, and from what Alex just said, sounds like it's been very useful. I'm one of the program directors in the NETS cluster, and whereas Alex and Murat are more on the wireless side, I'm one of three program directors who deal more with what we call the wired side of networking. So I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, Murat, would you like to say a couple of words? Yeah.
Right. Thanks for the opportunity to introduce myself. This is Murat Torlak. I'm a rotating program director from University of Texas at Dallas. And I typically deal with proposals in wireless communications, more specifically physical layer aspects of wireless communication proposals. And I'm happy to, be part of this meeting, and I'll be happy to provide any, respond to any questions that you might have, along with my colleagues at NSF. Thank you.
Yeah, again, thank you so much. And it's wonderful community. It's nice to have 50 people. So know that our community is growing and we have young talent that we want to grow, right? So, but if you have any specific questions, I'm not sure, Katie, how you kind of handle those questions. One thing I wanted to say is the new directions that we got from Margaret Martinosi, our assistant director for SAIS. She really wants to see people awarded career in much earlier stages, or kind of earlier than now. So this might affect kind of the way we're reviewing those proposals, because we really wanted to kind of fund research in earlier stages, so that people will do excellent research when they're having this career, and not then, like, if they already done everything and then it's kind of getting career as their, as a reward, right? So, and so as a result of this, we will definitely adjust a little our review process, and we'll realize that people applying on the first or second year of their faculty positions, and kind of we will understand that it might not kind of have a level of maturity that people who are like 3-4 years into jobs. So, and again, like our idea to identify most talented people earlier in the process, so they will have resources they need to do their career research. And would you like to add something to that, or Murat, regarding this new directions or new kind of guidelines?
Yeah, I would just say that while if you have a great idea and it's ready to go in terms of writing a career, don't feel like you have to wait till year 4 to do that, like Alex said. On the other hand, you do get 3 tries, so if you try earlier, you get some feedback and may help you succeed. And you may take 3 years to get your good idea, and that's fine too. I think it depends on the maturity of the idea. But like Alex said, the work doesn't all have to be done, to prove that it's a good idea before you submit your career.
Yeah. Actually, Minlan mentioned, right? So if you kind of measure your research output as a curve, right? So we want really like it's a place that you take off, right? So this is the most interesting place in your position as a faculty, when you just see that your research become mature and you kind of become more productive, right? So this is a place that we really want to give you resources to kind of achieving those goals.
Okay, so if you have any specific questions, I'm not sure, Katie, how you want us to handle this, right? So if anything on the chat or anything that was not you want to ask us as opposed to our senior colleagues or junior.
What I can do is I can be the MC and take questions. Are there any, and if you have a question and you can either put it in the chat or you can ask to be unmuted, let me know. Any specific questions for our wonderful program directors? Well, in the meantime, I'm going to say one of the earlier questions was, that idea, if you're going to start early and you've got your form, this was sort of a bit of a discussion between Ness and George was how much should be work that you've done already and how much should be future work and how do you balance that?
Murat, you want to take on this? And
I'll let Ann take a crack at this.
Yeah, that's a tough question. I mean, I think you want to demonstrate that the idea has legs. But demonstrating it has legs is not, doesn't mean that there's still not a lot to do. And I like the hockey curve analogy that I guess some Minlan and Alex, you repeated, just enough to show that this is a really interesting and rich and sort of long-lasting research area. But again, you don't have to be way up the curve in terms of what you've already done.
If I can add, like there is no specific prescription, right? So each proposal is different, right? And we don't want really people to follow the same kind of scenario, right? So it's very specific to what you're proposing, but we definitely want to see that you thought deeply about those problems, right? So it's not something that, fresh from the board that you just discussed with your students, right? And just put it in a proposal and send it, right? And sometimes what we see is that people didn't even do some kind of back of the napkin or envelope calculations, right? So, so definitely some amount of preliminary work would be really helpful to see that those ideas are even feasible in some sense, right? And again, it's like just depends on nature of your work, because if you're doing it on some kind of very sophisticated test beds, it can take years to do it, right? We don't want you to wait for this, but whatever you can show to demonstrate your ideas, right? It's definitely will be helpful. And it's again, like as George and Ness mentioned, it's kind of, it's a difficult to balance all of those, but again, like your proposal should be forward looking as opposed to just kind of getting rewards for what you already done, right? Because if you already done this, it's still an NSF proposal. It's called award, but it's award for kind of giving you resources to do something in the future, right? It's not awards from what you already done, because you already done, it's done, right? So just kind of make sure that once you position those results, right, that they kind of supportive, you can use them to supporting ideas, right? And kind of have some preliminary indications that they are feasible, that you have paths for success, but it's a lot more needs to be done. This is why you're applying for this career.
Okay, so we have a question about the best number of research assistants to have in the budget.
Yeah. I think in solicitation, it says you kind of just one student over those 5 years, right? I think it's what solicitation says, right?
So one student, yeah.
Yeah, so it depends on institutions, right? So because, for example, if you're talking about kind of institutions that don't have a PhD program, then you can include like undergraduate researchers, right? So it just depends, and maybe you can add to this, right?
So one of the themes that came up in the panel.
Sorry, Katie, Anne wanted to say something.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No. I go ahead.
Okay, sure.
Oh, I was just going to say one of the themes that came up in the panel, which I thought was very good, was people, not getting accepted the first time, not getting accepted the second time, but getting accepted the third time. So what advice would you give to first-time proposal writers who get it back and they go, oh, no? How would you advise them to recover from that and redo?
Again, Murat, and
well, I mean, it's a sort of even the seasoned proposers, right? They don't get it right in the first place. I mean, you can probably ask Ness, how many times he tries. It's more like a teaching, you might teach the same class over and over again, every year you try something different, you don't get it right. Even if you get it right in previous year, you may not remember what you did in the previous year, or the students change, the subjects change. So you have to, I guess you have to be prepared to, respond to whatever comes out, and don't get disappointed and keep moving. And, one of the, I guess one good thing about being a faculty member, that either you learn or you know how to be resilient, or you are prepared to learn how to be resilient, right? So if you're not, if you don't like that, probably, it may not be good on you, just keep doing this, or, so I guess being resilient, keep trying, and don't get sad or upset, just, nothing personal.
Yeah, so Anne needs to leave. So Anne, if you want to, any closing wisdom or thing, if not, thank you so much for stopping in. And you know how to find us, right? So you know where we are. So it's, and kind of please contact us. And we always love to talk to young, and we're trying, like, our busy schedule is super busy right now, especially in this time of the year with all multiple things. But for young investigators, we try to always find time. So, and thanks for joining.
Yeah,
Thank you so much.
Yeah, just echo that. Like, I've had many PIs say to me, "Oh gosh, I'm so afraid to send a PD email." And so we always say we're not scary people. And like Alex said, we would love to talk to you and hear about your ideas and give whatever guidance we can to help you write the best possible proposal. So don't be shy.
See, the worst thing that can happen, sorry, Anne, go ahead.
Go ahead. No, go ahead. Tell us the worst thing that can happen.
Okay, the worst thing that can happen is that we don't respond, but we have to respond.
If you don't respond, please send again, right? Sometimes.
Yeah, keep trying. Yeah.
Because I'm kind of, okay.
Sorry, I have to drop. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
Sure.
So the next question I see in the chat box regarding collaborators, right? So again, it's collaborations and always tricky in career, right? Because unlike any other proposals, it's your own thing, right? So it's career focusing on a particular person, right? Because it's called career, right? So it's your career path. And of course, you're encouraged to collaborate, right? So it's definitely, I think in today's environment, it's difficult to do something by yourself in many areas, right, including ours. So definitely it's good to have many collaborators, but make sure that it's driven by you, right? It's not some research that collaborators already doing, right? And they associated with this and you just helping them, right? So make sure that it's centered on you and you driving this, and to achieve this, you engaging with those collaborators. So make this proposal about you, not about collaborators, right? So it's, and sometimes it's kind of sometimes when they're making those tenure decisions, right? And people involved in many papers, they say like, is it really this person driving this? Who is driving this research, right? But definitely it doesn't matter, right? So if you engage with collaborators with other universities, your own universities, it doesn't really matter. It's actually maybe some advantage to going outside, right? But again, you will not be judged on your collaborators if you just put natural. Just sorry, I'm picking on you, right? It's not will make your career, right? If you, it will not be judged. It will be judged on your research. Murat, if you want to add something.
I guess the advice is that don't go overboard with including collaborators. Is like more people you include is sort of you're reducing the reviewer pool in some sense, because any collaborator you have, they will be conflicted with your proposal. So, I mean, we've seen cases like, hey, I mean, because sometimes your panelists don't feel comfortable reviewing your proposal because, hey, I've seen this proposal, or, I'm collaborating with this person, even if, it might have chatted with you or something. So, if it is needed for your proposal, of course, it makes sense, then do it. If it is like forced in some sense, like you're actively searching, and in some sense it's a little bit artificial, I mean, seeing that person on the proposal, I don't think it will impact the reviewer's decision, because it will look at what you've written, what you're proposing. And in that context, if that person's involvement makes sense. Other than that, I don't think it will add anything extra to the proposal.
Right. Again, it's each proposal is a story, right? So it needs to make sense for the story, right? If people starting feeling it's something artificial and kind of you're just doing it for sake of doing this, right? People will feel it, right? But just do whatever is necessary to achieve your research goals, right? And but again, like make sure it's driven by you, right? So if if you kind of participating with another well-known person, people might say, okay, you just kind of, you're still graduate student, right? So it's the worst things that can happen for this career, right? Because you need to demonstrate you are independent researcher and you driving, you kind of responsible for this. So the next questions I see, like best practices to discuss educational plan, if it's like in separate section or do it in each section, right? So it's okay. I think most proposals that I see, it's in separate section, right? But definitely in career goal is to integrate research and education, and many times it's not really connected really well, right? So it's definitely, you can do it whatever way you feel kind of appropriate, right? So, and not to distract from the flow, right? But it's definitely maybe not a bad idea to do it in every section, right? So I'm not sure. It's kind of whatever you think it's reasonable, right? And but most of the proposal I saw, it's kind of a separate section to talking about education. Murat, do you have anything to add here?
Are you responding to that education?
Yeah, this education, right?
Well, I mean, as you know, career is a plan for both, right? It's a research plan and education plan. And again, depends on what you're proposing. So we cannot tell you, you need this many pages, but we can definitely tell you that it should not be half page. So, but it cannot be 14 pages probably either, right? Because it has to have some research elements. So it's a good balance. And also it depends probably on which institution that you're coming from. If it is submitted from a undergrad heavy type of institution, if it makes sense in that context, then of course, but you will be the decider on what is appropriate for the program that you are trying to build, because in the end, this is your program, this is your research, this is your education plan.
Right. I think the question is about like kind of dispersed throughout the proposal or concentrated. So both have risks and benefits, right? But risk of dispersing it, that people might have kind of difficult time finding it, right? Because when they're writing a review, they need to comment on broader impacts, right? So, and you want to help your reviewers to clearly see, right? Because if it takes time for them to find it, they might miss something, right? So it's sometimes kind of, this is probably most of the proposals that just have one section, very solid, right? That it's easy for reviewers to answer, to review it, right? But you can also mention it in other as appropriate, right? Because it's also nice that you have this tight integration, but it's just your decision. Okay.
So an analogy might be the following. Sorry, Ness, I think you were going to say something.
No, go ahead. I'll speak after you. Go ahead.
So it's more like if you're looking at a view, right, from a distance, it should looks good, and then as you get closer and closer, it still needs to look good, right? So it's so if whoever wants to read it in detail still needs to like your proposal. Whoever wants to look at this from a very very far away distance, it needs to still look good. So.
Excellent point. It's kind of multi-resolution, right? So you can look at this picture. It
sounds similar. So I think my only sort of caution is if you include it only in the research thrusts, because reviewers are so used to looking at the broader impact as a separate section. They might miss it, right? So this goes back to Murat's point. Those that are looking at it from the 1,000-foot point might miss that aspect if you only include it in the research thrust. So I think it's not a bad idea if you want to make some connections in the research thrust. But if I was to give advice to my colleagues, I would say make sure that you have a separate section on that so that the reviewers don't miss it. That's all. Yeah, just because we've been so used to and conditioned on seeing that separate section. Yeah.
But on the other hand, our panelists are pretty flexible, right? So, and it's, yeah, we don't we intentionally don't release any template, right? So, and it's kind of, if you want to do something unconventional, it's sometimes, it's more danger, right? That people how react, but some people actually really like it, something unconventional, rightness. You see something fresh, and you're definitely taking a little bit more risks with that.
Okay, well, we only have a couple more minutes left. Any last words of wisdom for our audience? And by the way, audience, I will be sending out a post-workshop survey. So be ready to see that in your mailbox. Okay, maybe in a couple days. Yes. Any last thoughts?
So from us,
thanks for putting this together.
Sure, my pleasure.
Yeah.
And good luck to all the career proposal writers.
Yes, good luck.
Lots of luck.
All right.
Yeah. Thank you.
Well, thank you all.
I want to thank Professor Wilson and her team for putting it all together, and all panelists for kind of making themselves available. And it's a really great service for the communities that we're trying to build. And, and hopefully we'll be seeing a great set of proposals next fall. So we have something to work on, right? And whoever for people who are writing this, don't be scared, right? So just put your best work. Don't try to fit into any particular, do whatever you think you do best, right? And that only you can do best, right? Then it's, this will be kind of the two proposal will stand out. And also, if you did get a rejection, it's nothing to say about quality of work you're doing. It's a really tough competition, right? So, and we all get rejected all the time. We deal with this, right? You just kind of make yourself a better researcher, right? So, and it just, it's nothing wrong with that, right? And I know many excellent researchers who didn't get career, right? So it's not that it's like stamp of approval that it's absolutely necessary. It's just a competition. We do our best, right? So if not, it's not, right? So it's just something that we need to deal with in life all of the time.
There's always reviewer number 3 that we have to worry about.
Yeah, it's true. But it's unlike journals, we're not really putting our reviews in.
That's right.
Okay.
Thank you all so much, and thank you all for attending.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. Thanks.
Bye.